Thank you for your presentations. Thank you for inviting me to speak today here on the terrorist threat and about what should be done to fight efficiently against terrorism and what was the French strategy and what is still the French strategy in that domain. The terrorist threat is no longer a security issue, but a global issue which deeply impacts on the security of the states and the stability of the international relations, in particular because radical Islamic terrorism feeds on geopolitical opportunities in order to thrive. If terrorism poses an actual threat for the democratic orders, it's not obvious that the public opinion, especially in Europe, has an accurate perception of that threat. Public opinion tends to delete the scenes of terror produced by terrorist actions from their consciousness. European countries have forgotten the Madrid attacks and London attacks. In fact, only states that have experienced terrorism are aware of the reality of the threat. But it's true that the visibility of the terrorist activity is generally weak given the specific typologies of Al-Qaeda's networks and of the groups sharing their strategy. Al-Qaeda and its associates have a high capability to adapt to the political, economical and social evolution of their adversaries. Very opportunistic, attentive to the world's evolutions, reactive to political and geopolitical factors, the radical Islamist networks established across the continents take advantage of the tensions of an international crisis as well as the prevarications and the mistakes of the states in their management of world affairs in order to promote their strategy of violence. In fact, Al-Qaeda and the groups and networks evolving in its wake are very responsive to all the data they might benefit in their deadly strategy. For example, Al-Qaeda was not directly involved in the Christmas Day incident. The young Nigerians who tried to blow up the planes heading to Detroit has not been ordered by Osama bin Laden to do it. But Osama bin Laden endorsed the failed attempts and threatens new attacks against the United States, taking an actual advantage for his propaganda. Likewise, Saeed al-Shiri, the Yemen's Al-Qaeda deputy chief, congratulated in an audio messages the Nigerian for his blessed attempt. In the same way, Al-Qaeda and his associates are also seeking to take advantage of rights granted by the Western democratic order, especially in Europe, to strengthen their operational capabilities. For example, Islamic fighters were instructed in Afghanistan before 2001 to use the Schengen zone, given the absence of border control and of European mechanisms to make the extradition process easier. Likewise, Al-Qaeda asks its followers to use US providers for their electronic communications rather than European ones, given the legal protection granted in the legal judicial systems by the Fourth Amendment and the probable cause principle, which make more difficult to search hard drive in which are stored the messages. I have personally experienced these situations in the Richard Reed, the shoe bombers, investigation. Actually, the terrorist threat, contrary to what some experts pretended, is still great and in some extent increasing. The Times Square bomb attempt, the suicide attack in Kampala by the Somalian Shabab, and more recently the series of attacks in Mogadishu, as well as increasing activities of Akim in the Sahel zone, put in light by the beheading of a French citizen in Mali, demonstrates the reality and the acuteness of such a threat. However, today it's more difficult to grasp the Islamic terrorist threat, given the fact that new factors are blurring its outlines. Al-Qaeda continues to challenge the world in the Middle East, in the half-pack zone, in the Central Asia, in Somalia, in Africa. In fact, no region in the world is nowadays spared from the Islamist terrorist threat, even in Latin America, where Lebanese sleeping cells might be reactivated by the Hezbollah in the context of the nuclear Iranian standoff. It's a matter of fact that radical Islamists organizations and groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda have increased the figures and the intensity of their attacks, especially in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Yemen, and in the Horn of Africa. Moreover, they have changed of strategy. The terrorist threat today is scattered, polymorphous. It doesn't issue from some central command, but is a mutating system that responds to any situation or event from which it might benefit. So that evaluations of the threat depends on a flexibility of mindset that can match this viral behavior. Nevertheless, Al-Qaeda and its associates, especially the loose conglomeration of jihadists located in Europe, is still keeping on using the Palestinian issue in their propaganda in order to convince members of sleeping cell to join jihad area, just like tribal zone in Pakistan. Such propaganda serves also as a catalyst to recruiting process for new jihad followers. So, last year, in January, Al-Qaeda leaders Abu Yahya al-Libi, in a video posted on Islamic website, urged to carry out attacks in the West for what he called the Israeli annihilation campaign in Gaza. Ayman al-Zawahiri did the same 2 months later, calling for jihad attacks against Western countries and Israel. Since 2001, Al-Qaeda is intending to convincing the Palestinian organizations, including the Hamas, to embrace the global jihad. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi offered in 2002 to support the Islamic Jihad and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in providing them with money and explosive jackets. But those organizations rejected this offer. Tonight, radical movement linked to Al-Qaeda tried to set up base in North Lebanon and even in the Gaza Strip. Up to now, Al-Qaeda seems to have failed in its attempts to establish operational connections with Palestinian organizations. But such connections could be occurred in the future. From that point of view, must be quoted the Gaza flotilla raid in May 2010. This flotilla, organized by FGM and the Turkish IHH, was not only carrying humanitarian aid. This initiative, aiming at breaking the naval blockades, pertains to the same ideological strategy. IHH is an organization designated by the US government as an organization created by Hamas leadership funds to transfer funds to the terrorist organizations, Hamas, but it was also an NGO involved in terrorist activities, which acted in the 90s as a cover for Al-Qaeda. It had been brought in light in the course of a criminal investigation that IHH was in close contact with a terrorist cell in Milan and supported militants in their fight in Bosnia and Afghanistan. In addition, it played an important role in the Al-Qaeda bomb plot targeting the United States territory in 1999. This NGO is still suspected to support radical activists linked to Al-Qaeda. Fighting against terrorism is a common challenge for all the states concerned by that threat. The combat against terrorism has to be led resolutely. The combat against terrorism has to be without weakness or concessions, even if it needs, to some extent, to infringe individual rights or freedoms, if it is required by circumstances. Adopting a wait-and-see or lax attitude towards terrorist networks would jeopardize our liberties. But to carry out this task, don't give in the lure of a law and order strategy implementing counter-attack procedures situated outside the legal field. Such an approach, which plays in the hand of terrorism, is politically questionable and inefficient in the long term. So, we must fight against terrorism within the framework of the law. It is a crucial requirement because there is neither actual opposition or discrepancy between seeking efficiency and having regard for the law. Nevertheless, fighting effectively against terrorism requires a real political will, adapted and effective legal tools, and a strategy aiming at this goal. As far as it is concerned, France has already considered that to place the struggle against terrorism within a legal framework is a basic premise. And whatever the circumstances, we have never yielded to temptation to resort to special legal means. France, which have been targeted by different terrorist organizations for more than 30 years, have developed over years, in the course of the evolution of the threat, a strong and efficient legal system to prevent the country from terrorist attack. Taking into account the new typology of the threat, we consider that immigration law and border control, as well as other reactive approach of the terrorist threat in the global conception of the war on terror, cannot be the linchpin on any relevant anti-terror strategy. Such a defensive policy is outdated and ineffective, especially in the face of the shifting shape of the terror networks, which are now recruiting and training citizens from the West outside their countries to go back home to commit terrorist acts. France has experienced such a situation 15 years ago. United Kingdom discovered the homegrown phenomenon in 2005, and the United States 2 years later. The US needs a new approach with new tools and methods. In France, we have adopted a proactive strategy. As a result, we have not been hit on our soil by a terrorist attack since 1996. But we have succeeded to foil an average of 2 attempts a year of attacks during that period. Aware of danger issued from the terrorist threat, France has developed a genuine doctrine in a white paper on domestic security for dealing with terrorism. This white paper stresses on legal approach. In the fight against terrorism, we can read in the preface, to renounce, our democratic principles are our best weapon. To renounce these values would to play into the terrorist hands. To give into the temptation to change our standards would be to begin to lose the fight. So let us remain faithful to our values. They are our greatest strengths in our fight against terrorism. What's the reason why in France the judicial system plays a major role in the fight against terrorism? Not only to prosecute and trial those who are suspected to be involved in terrorist activities, but also to act before the threat in a proactive strategy aiming at disrupting any attempt of terrorist attack. That is the main originality of the French system. But our counter-terrorism strategy has been shaped by the evolution of the threat, especially that issued from radical Islamic movement after the collapse of the Cold War. So let us briefly picture the evolution of that threat prior to address the French counter-terrorism strategy. The radical Islamic threat is a product of a complex, sinuous and protein evolution, the feature of which have been never meeting before. The Islamic terrorism came into being from the ruins of the bipolar world in Egypt, with Jamaat Islamiyah involved in the first attacks against the World Trade Center in New York, in Indonesia, and in Algeria. September attacks are not an historical incident, nor a fortuitous event, but the result of a gradual and complex evolutions which have emerged at the beginning of the 90s. In the course of the numerous terrorist cases I have personally conducted since 1994, we have put into evidence an outstanding continuity between the terrorist activities of the GIA in Algeria and Europe in the 90s, the training of thousands of jihadists from European Union in Afghan camps during the same period, and the assassination of the Commandant Massoud on September 9, 2001, followed 2 days later by the Al-Qaeda bombing in the United States. But during that period, nobody paid actual attention to these deadly evolutions. France was early affected by the radical Islamic violence with the emergence of the GIA, a radical Salafist organization with the same ideology and the same strategy as Al-Qaeda. Stemming from political upheavals in Algeria after Islamic parties were banned in 1992, GIA and other radical Islamist groups went underground. They constituted in Europe, and more specifically in France, clandestine networks of logistical and financial supports. These entrenched structures, with a direct connection to the Algerian Maquis, were led by Mujahideen who are undergone military training in Afghanistan camp. The GIA leaders then developed a jihad strategy targeting Algeria and France. French citizens were kidnapped and slaughtered in Algeria. In the same time, sleeping cells set up in France were very active. These cells were reactivated in 1999 for the bombing carried out in France, especially in the metro network in Paris. This terror attack had been preceded 6 months earlier by the hijacking of an Air France scheduled flight between Algiers and Paris. The operation was in fact was aiming at hurling the plane onto the Eiffel Tower, just like the Twin Towers in New York 7 years after. Such a strategy foretold Al-Qaeda, namely to export violence in a Western country and using for that purpose an aircraft as a weapon of mass destruction. At the same period, French counter-terrorism services had their attention drawn to the Afghan tropisms of a young immigrant as well as native French citizens converted to Islam living in large cities' suburbs. It appears that more than 1,000 militants of jihad have been sucked up by the Afpak zone, where they have been trained in military camps which were in control of Al-Qaeda. Such an evolution emphasizes the key role played by the land of jihad, such as Afghanistan, Bosnia, Kashmir, Chechnya, and Iraq. All these mujahideen, after being trained, were ordered to go back home to commit terrorist attacks. That homegrown phenomenon we have experienced 10 years ago before the London bombing. Furthermore, our investigations of the Islamic networks enable us right from 1996 to uncover the first plan of Al-Qaeda to confront the United States within its borders, namely the Islam plot, the worldwide network supported by many groups and structures in Europe, in Canada, in the Far East, and even in Australia. The Turkish IHH appeared at that time to be the crossroad of the members of this plot, and they benefited from its operational support. Ressam was arrested in the West Coast near Seattle on December 1999. The target was the LAX airport. Likewise, the Airbus hijacking the Millennium Bomber plot represented a strategic step to confront the United States on its soil and was actually more significant than other attacks against American targets located outside the U.S. territory, such as the 2 bombing attacks in East Africa or the bombing against USS Cole in Yemen. But such an evolution in the strategy of Al-Qaeda has not been assessed accurately. After 2001, the war in Iraq had been an impact of the evolution of the threat. Since the fall of 2002, due to an intense propaganda, France had to face up to an unprecedented radicalization process which had increased the recruitment of new candidates of jihad. Moreover, this new line of jihad has deeply reshaped the outline of the threat and reoriented the strategy of the Islamic networks. The new cells were more scattered and their members more radical than their elders. For the first time, those activists joined Iraq, a new jihad zone, to carry out suicide operations, which is not in the Sunni tradition. In the first stage, they have been used by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi as cannon fodder. But in late 2004, some of them were instructed to go back home to export jihad, including by suicide operations. In 2005 and 2006, we arrested 15 jihadists trained in Iraq and in camps in the north of Lebanon who have planned to carry out bombing in France, one of them with chemical products. Today, the matter of concern is not in Iraq anymore, but the Afpak zone and the Sahel area, with the emergence in 2007 of a new organization directly connected to Al-Qaeda called Al-Qaeda Organization in the Islamic Maghreb. It was the result of an alliance between the Algerian Salafist Group for Preaching and Fighting, GSPC, and Central Al-Qaeda. Hakim has established new headquarters in Algeria, but his southern wing is very active in Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. This jihadist group is also suspected to have set up operational links with the Boko Haram organization in Niger and the Somalian Shebab. Hakim is a major threat to France. Since 2008, several members of these organizations living in France have been arrested while they are plotting against the country. Hakim used Mali territory, a very weak country, as its rear base. The members resort to kidnapping of foreigners in Sahara Desert with the support of criminal groups and warlords. It has recently assassinated a French citizen after the beheading of a British hostage in June 1999. This organization is also involved in drug trafficking, especially cocaine from Latin America. Facing such a number of different terrorist threats, how France reacted, what counter-terrorism strategy is implemented to struggle against terrorism. Conscious that the terrorist threat could put our fundamental values at risk and endanger the stability of the states, France, as in the 80s, reinforced its legal means and its judicial systems in order to cope with that threat. Moreover, with a white paper on domestic security against terrorism made public in March 2006, the French government has, for the first time, developed a genuine doctrines for dealing with the terrorist threat. France wanted to go further and formulate a comprehensive security strategy for several reasons. The first reason is that the threat to the country has never been so great. Since the Madrid and London attack, it is obvious that Europe is clearly a target, and notably France, with the threat issued by Hakim. The second one is that we are facing a strategic threat targeting our interests all over the world. The last one is in relation with the new typology of the threat, which is constantly changing. So we consider that we need a comprehensive strategy. The white paper states that the goal of this endeavor is threefold. We must first better understand the working of terrorist groups, taking into account that they take advantage of well-developed operation network in Europe country. The second objective is to define a counter strategy tailored to the threat we face, bearing in mind the new technological tools and modern means of communications used today by terrorist groups, either to increase their propaganda or to improve their operational capability. Finally, the goal of the white paper is to better inform our fellow citizens about the threats that concern them and about the tools we are putting into place to protect them. To succeed in this difficult task, we must have the confidence in the public opinions. Faced with a threat that seeks to divide our society, our fight must be everybody's fight. It must convince those living in our country about the seriousness of the threat and the importance of the rules that must govern our counter-terrorism systems. We could achieve this goal given the French people are not actually reluctant to admit measures taken to combat against this terrorism threat, even if they infringe in some extent the civil liberty, unlike in other European countries. From this standpoint, the fight against terrorism has never been France is a matter of political dispute. But in the fight against terrorism, undoubtedly the French response to terrorism is neither military nor based on emergency legislation. It is judicial, in connection with the intelligence services, which plays a key role. This system is structured around a series of legal provisions dedicated to counter-terrorism and to implementation of an original operational methodology focused on risk prevention. The main feature of this legislative arsenal is to be adapted to the terrorist threat, flexible and evolutionary. Therefore, it is not a rigid legal system due to the non-accusatory regime of the French penal procedures. It has vastly facilitated this flexibility and allowed our legal system to be efficient without, however, being free from legal frameworks. For example, we don't have any disclosure procedures or constraints of the Fourth Amendment and the probable cause principle for carrying out search or seizures. The cornerstone of the French legal system is the statute of Setebos 96, which centralized in the District Court of Paris prosecution, investigation and judgment of terrorism. From then on, these centralizations allowed judicial actors to get handle of the nebulous, polymorphous and mutating terrorism, which are the features of the radical Islamic cells operating in Europe. It also enables specialization in counter-terrorism and makes international cooperation easier and more reactive. Moreover, according to the French law, a suspect can be held by police and interrogated without any contact with anyone, including a defendant attorney, for 4 days and now for 6 days. In addition, beside a large range of investigative techniques, such as phone tapping, monitoring traffic, and even use of intrusive measures, the magistrate of investigation, juge d'instruction, can order search, seizures, and arrest, and charge suspect as well as issue international warrant of arrest. Apart from these criminal procedures rules, the 1986 statute introduced the offense of the criminal conspiracy in relation to a terrorist undertaking, which is the linchpin of the fight against terrorism. Such legal provision allows to dismantling of financial and logistical support networks before being capable of backing terrorist operations. So these specific legal tools tend to prevent the terrorist risk through a resolutely proactive policy. We consider that the traditional barrier, opposition between prevention and prosecution is nowadays a bygone conception. Prosecution should support our capacity for anticipating terrorist activity and especially violent action on our soil. But to carry out this proactive strategy, it is necessary to involve the intelligence agency in that task. In France, the Central Directorate for Internal Security, which is the French counter-espionage and counter-terrorism services, has also law enforcement capabilities. It is currently our main partner, and we entrust it with the majority of the Al-Qaeda-related terrorism investigation. However, this synergy between intelligence agency and the judiciary necessitates the protection of each other's actors' operational and legal rules. We can easily comply with such requirements. On a legal point of view, all the statements are admissible, including an intelligence lead, and we don't have to disclose either the way of the intelligence has been obtained or its origin. The efficiency of this system has been demonstrated. Since 1996, we have not been struck by terrorist groups, but each year we have fought bombing attempts by cracking down on cells engaged of terrorist threat or intending to back its perpetrators. Briefly, in conclusion, I will say that the new outline of the threat, its specific features, and the fact that we are facing a worldwide phenomenon should prevent us from having a national and negotiating approach of the threat. Al-Qaeda-related networks, which are very responsive to any political and geopolitical situation, take advantage of such a national approach. And I will just add in finishly that we can succeed in that task if we have not the capability and the will to improve the international cooperation, which is the cornerstone of any efficient response, and that's the position of my country. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Judge.